Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I came in a minute ago, and do you ever have Monday mornings like this? I sat down opposite Nick, as I do every day. I'm preparing to do my little introduction to what's coming up on the programme, and something felt wrong. And I was looking around for what it was, because I presume Jacob Rees-Mogg was sitting in that chair a few moments ago. So I was sort of thinking, what's he done? What's he done to my chair? There's something not right here. So I'm looking around. I've got my newspapers. I've got my notes. I suddenly realised, with about 30 seconds to go, that the microphone was under the desk, effectively. I won't bore you with the geographical details of the studio. So after the best part of a decade and a half doing this job, I can still come to work and prepare to address the nation without noticing that I don't have a microphone in front of me. Ah, Mondays. Monday. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. Yeah. I just want to play you a little clip of Boris Johnson before we start pulling up our socks up and deciding what we're going to talk about together. This is from February 2016.
I think the situation would be absolutely unchanged in the sense that there's been a free travel area between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland for, I think, getting on for 100 years. There's no reason at all why that should cease to be the case.
Yeah, well done, Boris Johnson. Great stuff. Theresa Villiers, of course, is a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
I don't believe arrangements need to change. I think the land border we share with Ireland can be as free-flowing after a Brexit vote as it is today. You know, special status for Irish citizen and a common travel area allowing free movement for Irish citizens predates our membership of the EU by decades, and there's no reason why it can't continue in the same way after we leave the EU.
And now a Conservative MP who makes those two sound like geniuses when it comes to Irish matters. This is Andrew Bridgen MP speaking on a different radio station last night.
Are you committed, Andrew, to ensuring that Northern Ireland is not treated differently to the rest of the UK?
I am, yes.
But the Conservative government already accepts that Northern Ireland is different. Because after Brexit, no matter what happens, people in Northern Ireland, unlike the rest of the UK, will still have the right to be EU citizens. That's your position. You put that in your own Brexit position paper in Ireland.
Well, that's the common travel area as well, isn't it? We do have the right to go over to Ireland, don't we? As an English person, I have the right to go to Ireland. I believe I can ask for a passport, can't I?
It's nothing to do...
Well, the Irish people...
Hold on a moment. It has nothing to do with your right as an English person to come over to Ireland. Nothing to do with it.
Well, I'm sure that currently...
It's nothing to do with that.
We have a reciprocal agreement where I can go to Ireland and ask for an Irish passport, and someone from Ireland can come to the UK and ask for a British passport. We have that system. That's the system we have, isn't it?
Sorry, hold on. You think there is a reciprocal agreement where you as an English person can come over and get an Irish passport?
I can apply for Irish citizenship, yes.
Andrew Bridgen MP there, regularly wheeled out by the BBC, which is where that interview took place, and others as a sort of spokesperson for Brexit, arguing that as an English person he's entitled to an Irish passport. Now, I can't laugh anymore. I would have laughed at that once. Ivan's chuckling away in the background, but I can't find that funny anymore. It's not funny, because people still put themselves on the same team as him. You know, here is a bloke who's turned up to play football with a pair of flip-flops and a pogo stick, and still you want to be on his team. It doesn't make any sense anymore. Boris Johnson talking utter twaddle about, and he continues to do so, claiming today that the EU has behaved ruthlessly and that somehow we now have to fight back. David Davis arguing that now the EU are on the back foot and they're panicking. Some continental commentators have compared him to Chemical Ali from the last Gulf War. Of course, you remember the fella claiming everything was going brilliantly while stuff was blowing up behind him. I'm almost beyond rational analysis now, because you can't have a rational analysis of an irrational situation, can you? It's gone completely nuts. I wish I could tell you what some of these prominent Brexiters who won't come on my programme say to some of my colleagues privately before they actually sit down in front of the microphone. I wish I could share with you the levels of... it's a curious mixture of ignorance and arrogance that combine to create a sort of sense that, oh, well, the studio lights are on now, everything's going to be absolutely fine. The studio lights are off. I haven't got a clue what happens next. Don't talk to me about Canada plus. I've got squillions invested in the city. Canada deal won't cover financial services. What the hell is... I'll tell you what I'll have to do. I'll have to open a couple of funds in Dublin. But let's hope people don't join those dots together too quickly and clearly. Unbelievable. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. Boris Johnson, Theresa Villiers, Andrew Bridgen there. There's a lovely clip of Andrea Leadsom as well from not that long ago, which I think I'll share with you in the course of the programme as well, because what I'm intrigued by today is not actually the minutiae of the latest Brexit development. So I find that the people kind enough to listen to this programme can probably be now just divided into two camps. There's one who are now, regardless of how you voted, you're very grateful that you listen to this programme because none of this therefore takes you by surprise, or even if it does slightly take you by surprise, at least you knew what was plausible and possible because you had it explained to you. And then I suspect the only other people that you have are those who are still in denial. How else does it break down? The Good Friday Agreement and Theresa May's red lines were utterly, utterly incompatible. They always were. The European Union's position on what we can and can't expect after leaving the European Union has been clear since pretty much July 2016. They have not moved one iota because it's not a negotiation. It's an imposition of rules. You can't negotiate rules. It would be like playing chess, sitting down to have a game of chess and then trying to argue that knights should be able to move diagonally. That's what we've done as a country, and it's not your fault, it's not my fault, it's the fault of these charlatans, these shysters, these snake oil salesmen, these spivs and pantomime toffs, who told us we will win this game of chess, and then realised that they have to play by the rules of chess, and that they haven't got a prayer. Actually, chess isn't a great analogy, because you start with the same number of pieces. Imagine chess with 50 million pieces on one side of the board and 500 million pieces on the other side of the board, the 50 million claiming they're going to win because they'll be able to change the rules of chess. I don't even know that I'd describe myself as cross. Or I'm certainly not confused by what is happening. I'm very confused by the motivation of the people that's caused it. And how can they sustain such astonishing levels of dissonance and personal contradiction when events prove them completely wrong about what they have said before? Is it? I'm an incredibly pleased with myself individual sometimes. I'm not unaware of that. We all strive to be better people, but you can only do that if you admit your flaws. And I presume stubbornness and an inability to admit that you're wrong. But how much evidence do you need? And I'm not talking about punters. I'm talking about the proponents, the champions, the cheerleaders. How much evidence do you need? Here's another one. This is the woman who's now apparently leading the line of people who might resign if things... Oh, I can't even keep up anymore. It's Andrea Leadsom from 2013.
I'm going to nail my colours to the mast here. I don't think the UK should leave the EU. I think it would be a disaster for our economy, and it would lead to a decade of economic and political uncertainty at a time when the tectonic plates of global success are moving.
She's right. I mean, obviously she's right. And she knew that 5 years ago. So why did she then campaign for the opposite argument a couple of years later? She also, of course, claimed that there'd be no economic impact from Brexit whatsoever. These are people now who argue simultaneously, with a space of 1 or 2 years between them, they will argue simultaneously that black is white and black is black. And I don't know, because I'm in the game, as it were, albeit as a commentator and describer. I don't get it. Do you get it? I mean, how can they now be arguing the polar opposite of what they once argued? And it's so easy to forget as well. Have you considered this? Have you remembered this? It's the thing that we're supposed to be experiencing now is a seamless and straightforward move from one set of rules, from one rules-based institution to another. This is supposed to be a seamless and straightforward process that would improve all of our living conditions. You and me would be better off, and the status of the nation would be enhanced. You're now getting the people who told you that you were going to be better off and that Britain would somehow emerge stronger. These are now the people saying to you, well, we will survive, or it won't be the end of the world, or there could be benefits 50 years or 100 years down the line. These people told us our lives would be improved immeasurably and immediately. And they're getting away with that because the debate shifts every week into damage limitation and reverse ferrets. If I told you, sign here, right? Sign here, and by Christmas, you'll be richer, happier, and you'll have a bigger house. And then Christmas arrived, and you were poorer, miserable, and living in a shed, would you really claim that the terms of the contract that you signed had been met by me? Sign here, and you'll be living in in a big house with a swimming pool by Christmas. Christmas comes around, you're living in a shed with a puddle outside, and I'm trying to argue that is actually, technically speaking, a swimming pool. And when I said palace, I meant shed, but it's your fault for not those Ramonas. If only you'd believed in it, this shed could have been a palace by now. It's your fault for not believing in it. So what are we doing today? It's 10:15 already. I do apologise. It's a question again of the impenetrability of idiocy, isn't it? I mean, you hear these people saying now the polar opposite of what they said all along. So desperate to... I mean, the arguments between themselves. What happened to the will of the people? Even Boris Johnson and David Davis can't agree with each other about what's happening now. Boris Johnson today has written an article saying the EU are behaving ruthlessly and we've got to push back. David Davis is saying the EU are panicking about our wonderful approach and now's the time to capitalise on it. Those are the sort of two chief players in this game, but the two holders of the biggest offices who, of course, ran for the hills when reality began to bite, and now it's biting even harder. They're disagreeing with each other. So if you are still of the view that this is a good idea, do you now have to pick a side between Davis and Johnson, or have you spent so far and so long now with your head in the sand that it's just ambient noise? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I said to you about 3 months ago, and it was my most cautious prediction yet, actually, because things were getting so messy, that it looked a little bit like no deal or no Brexit were becoming inevitable destinations. I mean, I'd still say that's a very cautious prediction, but I'll tell you something that I do find very, 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 well, almost hard to admit, is that in the back of my mind, throughout all of these months, and God knows I wish it was over now, I really do. And I like talking about it in an academic sense because it's really, really interesting, and you know how this programme works. We like understanding stuff. But even as I was patting you on the back, or you were perhaps occasionally patting me on the back for understanding it, when so many others didn't, I still had a little feeling in the back of my mind that we were wrong. I just thought, look, you know, I'm no admirer of Boris Johnson's, but he's a very successful man. I kind of naively presume that I live in a country where success on that scale must surely be reserved for people possessed of particular talents. For Michael Gove to move from writing a rather good column in the Times to being a cabinet minister made me think, crikey, I don't agree with him, and I can't really see what others see at the moment, but there must be something there. There must be, to have made these movements. Jacob Rees-Mogg less so. I think, you know, when you're born with a silver spade in your mouth and you use it to shovel money into emerging markets accounts, you don't need to be possessed of particular skills or talents. You go to a school like Eton, it kind of goes with the territory, or indeed a school like mine. And I just figured that there must be more to it. There must be something that we're missing. There must be a potential, not a unicorn. That's not fair. Just a rabbit in their hat that we can't currently see. It's pretty clear now that there's no rabbit, let alone a unicorn. And I don't really understand why. This isn't a criticism of any of my colleagues or the radio station. Why are people like David Davis still afforded the oxygen of publicity when they've been proved wrong about everything? Why is Jacob Rees-Mogg still taken seriously when he's been proved wrong about everything? Why is Boris Johnson trousering £250,000 a year from the owners of the Ritz to peddle the nonsense that Brexit is somehow anti-elite? I don't get it, actually. I generally like not getting things, but not when it is likely to damage a country that I love. So I haven't asked you a question. Phones have rung a bit. I think I'll just open them up. But particularly interesting calls from Ireland today, as ever. Any part of the country. How's this playing out for you? And following that, we'll probably talk about fracking. It's 10:19. I can't believe that you really thought there was always a link between success and talent, says Ben. Listen, I appreciate schools like the one I went to only exist to give people advantages that can be bought rather than developed. But I just didn't think, as every penny dropped, it never really... I couldn't never 100% believe that all of these people were as spectacularly and as completely wrong as I increasingly suspected they might be. Possibly I have a slightly deferential bone in my... No, that's not deference, because it had nothing to do with the status they were born with. It's nothing to do with the plummy accents or the pantomime toffery that made me think there must be something underneath that. It was the confidence and the status, not the status of birth, but the status achieved. So it could have been someone like Gisela Stewart just as much as it could have been Boris Johnson. I just thought there must be something. I mean, because I've added up, I've gone through these numbers 1 million times, and we keep coming out with £1 million missing from our accounts, and they keep telling me that that's not true, that we're £5 million up. I keep going through the numbers again and again and again. That's the bit I don't get. Let's start in Belfast this morning, because that seems to be where everything's going to end. Declan, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, I'm just quite alarmed by the way that...
Are you mildly perturbed, Declan, perhaps?
Yeah, just a little bit, just a little bit. Oh. No, terrified, actually. Basically, by the way, that Jacob Rees-Mogg, he talked about transitional issues. You know, there's going to be transitional issues.
Yes.
And they all treat it with such laxness and indifference.
Do you think they don't know? Do you think they don't know? I was hoping Jacob would appear on this programme at some point, but it's looking very unlikely. So I can't ask him myself at this juncture. I might ring in to Nick's show in a couple of weeks, but do you think they know? I mean, when you talk about not just trade agreements, but the 750 contracts covering everything from energy policy to aviation policy, all of these things potentially cease to exist on March the 29th of next year. It would be like putting through 1 million pages of complicated contract through a paper shredder and standing up the next morning utterly naked going, "Hey, come and get it, lads."
I think they do know, but they don't care because it won't affect them. You know, especially when it comes to Northern Ireland, it's going to result in these transitional.
But the other stuff will affect. The other stuff will affect them. All of the other contracts, 750 plus. Separate contracts and treaties which have nothing to do with trade, except in the sense that it's the oil that oils the wheels of trade. How can they not know? Just because if it's an ideological position that you've picked based on not liking stuff, in this case foreigners, or bureaucrats, whatever euphemism you want to use to mask the fact that it's all about the fact that they're foreign. The detail just doesn't matter. It doesn't compute. It doesn't chime in the way that it would with someone like you or me.
I think it does. Maybe it doesn't compute because they've been so insulated from it, you know, from the actual real effects of what these things mean. You know, it's just they've no idea how it's going to affect real people.
But nor have we. Really... I mean, you might have a better idea in Belfast of what the British border in Ireland represents and what we could be returning to. But most people in this country who would still be labelled Remainer.
Well, you just said the British border in Ireland, and
yes.
You know, I get everyone talking about the Irish border problem. It's not an Irish border. The Irish didn't put it up. No. It's a British border, but that's beside the point.
This is my new day's resolution was to start correctly describing that border. I'm a little late. I'm a little late to the party, but you're not helping me. It's not a criticism. I don't know if I'm helpable. I think I might be beyond help. But the notion that it will affect, because I mean, I have an Irish name, but I'm not invested in the peace process in the way that everybody on the island of Ireland is. I get affected by some of this, but I just read things, and I read it, and I read it with a bit of scepticism, so I double-check, or I speak to someone who knows what they're talking about, because they do it for a living, and they just explain to me so clearly that what's happening now is inevitable and was always going to come to this. I don't understand how people can stand up in public and still preach cakeism.
Well, I don't know how they haven't, when the initial negotiations, they didn't look at, well, what about the Good Friday Agreement? What about that?
Yes, but then you know, listen to this. This is Boris Johnson in 2016.
I think the situation would be absolutely unchanged in the sense that there's been a free travel area between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland for, I think, getting on for 100 years. There's no reason at all why that should cease to be the case.
It's not even a little bit true. In the proper meaningful sense, and he's still out there, he's still punting his columns, he's still... And listen, the reason why I obsess about this, as I'm sure you understand, is because I really, really care about the people that he's conning.
I mean, he's not just conning. That you're right there. He doesn't know about it.
No.
In that case, he doesn't know. That's very clear from listening to him. You know, and maybe he doesn't care either, or maybe he wants to build a bridge between England and Ireland.
Sure, that would have been funny a couple of years ago. It's not funny now. It's an official Boris Johnson policy proposal. Declan, thank you. It's crikey. How dare you take up so much of my programme, interrupting my stream of consciousness. Can I squeeze in Adam in Nottingham, or is it going to be too tight? Adam, can I give you a minute and a bit? Go on, what do you want to say?
Sorry, James. It's just a very big one. It's just really about how do we actually bring people together.
But you have to have common ground, don't you? You have to have a few things that you can agree on, and I don't even know what that looks like anymore.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of this, where we have basically a binary yes/no decision, where I'm sort of coming from is you can't have people's vote still saying yes or no. What you could actually have is essentially get a three-way. So, well, maybe not even a three-way things, a couple of rounds like a presidential-style election, whereby, A, you get a common position against Brexit, and then actually have a final vote, Brexit versus actually Remain. That's the only way, because otherwise as I think we discussed ages ago, about 2 weeks ago, when I mentioned that there were 27 possible scenarios,
yes.
you can't basically get a united front against all of those items. So actually, if you get a common position, whether or not it's basically Swiss,
it's never going to be a common position, is it? You just mean a codified deal, something that is written down on paper, but as soon as you write it down on paper, it falls apart, which is why people like Boris Johnson and David Davis have to keep saying there's something wonderful on the horizon. I can't tell you what it is yet, but it's going to be great. It's going to be great, because the minute you write it down, other people get to tear it to shreds.
Well, the thing is, though, you've still got to get a majority, and what would actually probably happen is, in this case, James, vote. Would the vast majority of people be voting for WTO or Super Canada?
They still won't know what it is. That's the problem. I mean, the levels of ignorance. If Boris Johnson can go on national television to display utterly weapons-grade ignorance about Ireland and Irish history, then how the hell does an ordinary Joe who doesn't have any professional interest in this sort of thing come to a clear idea of what WTO terms are? WTO terms would be disastrous on every level for our country and for our economy. But they're so invested now in the con, and I don't think they all knew it was a con when they started, but it's so stubborn and so binary and so divided now, they can't tell the truth. They literally can't tell the truth. They cannot turn around and say, this has all been a horrible disaster. Until, and this is what will happen over the course of the next 48 hours, it's all been a horrible disaster, but it's definitely not our fault. It's 10:31. Headlines guaranteed to draw one's attention. Chapter 466. Talk show host faces deportation. Story that obviously strikes a chill into my talk show host heart. We'll be meeting Hilary Iniomo Marcus momentarily and finding out a little bit more about his story and how a tax offence means that he could be sent back to a country he left at the age of 10. 10:36 is the time. Before that, back to this. Trying to make sense of what's happening now, when I can't pretend to be someone that I'm not, when we have collectively sort of seen this coming now for the best part of 2.5 years. The notion that the European Union would ever compromise the so-called four freedoms, or that the terms of the Good Friday Agreement could in any way accommodate what Theresa May described as the red lines. But look, I've got an overdeveloped ego, but it's not so madly overdeveloped that I have sat here for 2.5 years thinking, God, I'm right and everyone else is wrong. I have mostly sat here thinking, I think I'm right. Certainly the people who do this, rather than simply talk about it, think I'm, or seem to think I'm right. But these are prominent people. These are not, these are not people who've just walked in off the street and been asked to pick an opinion. These are prominent, successful, high-status individuals. And the sheer scale of their wrongness seems to me to be such that I can't quite believe it. Does that make sense? So I'd look at them and I'd think, well, I don't share your politics, but I do share your country. We live in the same society. We abide by the same rules and conventions. And I can't quite see how, if you are as wrong as I think you are, I can't quite make sense of the fact that you're still Foreign Secretary, for example, or Secretary of State for Brexit, for example. And now, as I think we can probably all agree, if you still want to blame it all on Lily Allen and Gary Lineker and me, that's fine. But we can all agree it's going horribly, right? Everyone can agree. No one's happy. No one's happy. Then at what point do you have to recognise that the responsibility for this has to lie with the people who said it would be really easy and great? It can't lie with anybody else. Unless you're doing something psychologically that I can't quite get my head around. Let's go back to Belfast. Lisa's there. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Well, thanks for taking my call, James.
You're very welcome.
It's just really to emphasise really what the problem is in Northern Ireland as well. Because, I mean, I've been listening to the whole idea about this backstop. I live in Belfast. I've been here for about 24 years now.
Yes.
And to me, it sounds like a pretty good deal for Northern Ireland, I'll be honest with you.
Yes.
Because we can have, don't want to use the word cake and eat it, but we can have, in a way, the best of both worlds.
Yes, but the DUP won't wear it, will they?
No, well, that's the issue, because I tried talking to friends over the weekend about...
And also, you are describing a de facto reunification of Ireland, and regardless of where you sit economically or politically, historically, that's quite a big thing to smuggle through.
That's the problem here, because it's a bit like the Brexit vote. Over here, you've also got heart overhead. Because if you think about the Brexit vote being heart overhead, people voted with what they felt and not what they could see. Even now, people are going with heart overhead. It's the same in Northern Ireland. I mean, you can tell people here until you're blue in the face, this is quite a good deal, but their hearts say no. You know, if you in one community,
but you understand
that it doesn't matter how good it is.
Yeah, you can say to your neighbours and friends, this is quite a good deal, but it isn't a very good deal for anybody else.
No, I know.
I mean, what you're describing is essentially some armbands. The whole we're all drowning, but Northern Ireland has been given some armbands, and then you're explaining to people, look, we've got armbands, and they're saying, no, we can float, we're magical, we can walk on water. But I'm on the mainland, I'm over here, and I ain't got no armbands.
And honestly, I mean, I don't want to leave anyway. I mean, I voted Remain, so I really, really want to remain. But, you know, I look at an issue where I kind of still can. I mean, but because I wasn't born in Northern Ireland and I don't have any grandparents before 1920, I'm not entitled to an Irish passport.
I am.
So I still... Yay.
I'll adopt you. Do you want me to adopt you? I could adopt you, and then you could get an Irish passport.
No, I would love it. My son was born here.
Hang on. Andrew Bridgen said on the BBC last night that everybody English is entitled to an Irish passport, and he's the BBC's go-to man for Brexit cheerily. He believes in Brexit. I heard
that.
Did you?
No, I heard that, and I was absolutely... I mean, you want to laugh, don't you? And then you
Not
have to
anymore.
cry.
I can't laugh anymore. Ivan can. Ivan is the studio producer. He's got a very light sense of humour trigger, and anything will say. He's still chuckling away, although there's an air of manicness now to his laughter, Lisa. I'm getting quite concerned.
Yes, yeah. I think that, honestly, I genuinely think the world has gone mad. I mean, I've always been quite interested in politics, but at the minute, I've never known anything like this at all.
And I can't quite unpick it, because the minute you start trying to unpick it, you start leaving yourself open to potentially valid accusations of... This is where the condescending and the sneering and that's why that's been so powerful rhetorically, because I think that is part of what makes you think that you might have got it wrong. You look at it and you think, well, hang on, that's so obviously not true, or that's such a stupid thing to do. And then other people turn around and say, oh, how dare you call us stupid? How can you call 17.4 million stupid? You condescending, sneering, metropolitan elite Ramona. And you sort of go, well, maybe I am being a bit condescending, and maybe there is something there that isn't evidence of epic wrongness. But as each day passes, it becomes harder to pretend otherwise.
It is getting worse and worse. And I saw it was mooted, I think, yesterday about a general election, and about May might decide to go for an election. And one part of me thought, that's great, because I think 57% in Northern Ireland voted Remain. So maybe they would look at the situation, and then maybe the DUP would have a harder ride over here.
I don't know the numbers. The needle is not. It's not dancing around the place. I mean, other people from our sort of side of the fence will look at the latest polling saying 53, 47 or more in favour of Remain, but that makes my heart sing. I think it's actually the point of today's phone-in, because if you look at the current landscape and still get any... I mean, I don't understand how there could be more than 10 or 15%. You get your sort of UKIP headbangers, and once they've been filed off, how can anybody else still be looking at this and thinking that it's a good idea?
Well, it's just entrenched, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why polling is probably even less reliable than it usually is. Because if I ask you face to face and you were, what did you think? What are you going to do? Yes, still fine. But if you, in the privacy of a ballot box, actually have the opportunity to either vote for reality or unicorns, are 40-odd% of the country really still going to vote for unicorns? Lisa, thank you. That's 2 from Belfast this morning. Let's go now to Derry. Michael's there. Michael, what's going on?
Morning, James.
Hello, Michael.
Basically, just to carry on the conversation from our last caller.
Yes.
And she was talking about entrenchment. We now have a DUP MP talking about the Brexit vote being a fight for the union, which in this part of the world is really, really, really dangerous.
Of course it is. Tell my listeners why. Tell my listeners who aren't as invested in Irish history as perhaps you are, why that is such a frightening echo of the past.
Well, basically, go and Google anything Ian Paisley said for 30 years. And
I don't want to go and Google anything Ian Paisley said for 30 years. There's sort of the Pope was the Antichrist and all that sort of malarkey. But just in terms of 2018, why should I, in London, be concerned about a DUP MP talking about the defence of the Union? I know the answer.
Well, basically, from my perspective, my thinking is, then that'll eventually lead to the Tories talking on Second World War.
Yeah.
We have
this is that strange woman, Andrea Jenkins, talking about going down fighting or waving the white flag when I mean, you've elected to leave a club. The club have told you that you can't retain any of the benefits of being in a club, and suddenly you've turned into Tommy Atkinson. You suddenly think that you're embarked upon some sort of military campaign against the club that you've just voted to leave. It's nuts. And to answer your question, or to answer my question to you, people kill, terrorists murder to, quote, protect the Union. And that is why it's such dangerous language from a Member of Parliament.
Yeah, that's completely true, and obviously it's true on both sides. But basically, my personal belief is that the DUP know that their number's up, and they've lost the farmers up here. And with all the business... Because of what
Brexit will do to their trade.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And obviously they have to make it sound as if the best deal that the North would ever get is not. They're now talking about it's going to be a breakup of the Union. So instead of turning the North into a slightly lesser version of Switzerland, we're going to actually just be... I have absolutely no idea.
What do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen, Michael?
Honestly, James, I have absolutely no idea. At the minute, it's pretty scary to think about in terms of the business and the trade. Like I said to your researcher there before I come on, I'm about to drive across the border.
Are you?
And that'll take me approximately 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And in a year's time, it could probably take me 2 hours.
Someone did it live on the programme earlier this year, and we were still chuckling about it then. I'm chuckling rather less now. There's a lovely picture that did the rounds on social media of a church which has the building is in the Republic and the graveyard is in the North, and you know, the idea that you can put some sort of hard border back in these places is Oh, do you want to send you off with a spring in your step? Do you want a little reminder of what Theresa Villiers said when she was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland about the border?
Well, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Oh, here you go, mate. Greatest hit.
I don't believe arrangements need to change. I think the land border we share with Ireland can be as free-flowing after a Brexit vote as it is today. You know, special status for Irish citizen and a common travel area allowing free movement for Irish citizens predates our membership of the EU by decades, and there's no reason why it can't continue in the same way after we leave the EU.
Have a great day, Michael. Mind how you go. If you ever want to write a headline guaranteed to turn my head, you have to try very hard to do better than this. Former prisoner turned reformer and talk show host faces deportation. I'd come across Hilary Iniomo Marcus before. Did you? I mean, he joins me in the studio now. We'll talk about why you're here imminently. But when you were at National Prison Radio, did you win any awards?
Yeah, well, we've
Was I up for one of them?
I think you were.
I think you beat me in an awards. Get out. Forget it. I'm not helping you with your case. This is. I think I lost out to you one year.
I think it was the Third Sector Charity Award that perhaps we might have encountered each other.
Now, to begin at the beginning, you could walk out of this studio, and I say this having just met your one-year-old son, who's accompanied you today. You could, when you go downstairs, encounter Home Office staff or Border Patrol staff who could arrest you and take you immediately to a detention centre.
That is absolutely correct, Jamie. It is that, you know, sad for me, really, and frightening for me that, you know, I am very exposed and vulnerable. And so is my family as a whole, that, you know, they could potentially lose, you know, having a father, a husband at home, you know, any moment from now, really.
This is because, and we talk about Brexit a lot on this programme, and a lot of people who voted for Brexit will be utterly unaware of the 2007 Act, which empowers the government to deport anybody who's been imprisoned here for more than 12 months. Any foreign national is subject to automatic deportation if they've been sentenced to imprisonment for 12 months or more. So we better address why you have been imprisoned for 12 months or more.
Sure. In 2011, I was working on my own project, which was a transformation project, really, to help the DWP and the Job Centre to help young people who were from disadvantaged backgrounds back into employment. So during the time at which I was delivering this program, a cousin of mine, you know, a relative of mine, was also working on his own private venture, which was to buy, you know, cars that had been involved in slight accidents, fixing them up, and then selling them on. I gave him complete, you know, and I take personal responsibility for this. You know, I was naive, I was stupid. I was a very low point in my life whereby, you know, I wasn't thinking straight, and I gave full consent and power of attorney for him to actually act on my behalf as the company director, in essence. And unfortunately, what happened was he was actually forging fake invoices and claiming VAT back from HMRC, of which, you know, ultimately he owned up to it. You know, I wasn't aware of what he was doing. But as company house rules are set and fixed, you know, the buck stops with me, and I take full responsibility for that.
And that was 2 years and 3 months, of which you served 15.
Correct.
You came here from Nigeria with your parents, who both have British citizenship.
That's correct.
When you were 10, you lived in South London ever since. Do you have links back in Nigeria? Do you still have family there? When did you last visit? 2004 for a couple of weeks, and we returned, and I haven't been back since. Any relatives I did have there, you know, have since passed away. So my grandmother and my grandfather have passed on since. My siblings are here. My mother's here. My stepfather. Indeed, my wife, who's British-born, and children who are British-born are all here. All, you know, I've been here since primary school. So, you know, you can imagine the life I've built for myself and the ties I have to the UK and not to Nigeria, you know, surely not to Nigeria. Of course, and it's worth pointing out that while you were in prison, you got heavily involved in various charities, or in various, the radio station chiefly, but since leaving, it's the charity work that you've been doing. You've been visiting schools to deter people from offending. You've become a relatively tireless prison reformer. You're here today partly because my friend, the journalist Miranda Sawyer, has taken such an interest in your case after meeting you when she was writing about National Prison Radio, which is one of those schemes and ideas that helps people in prison prepare themselves for a life of law-abiding outside prison. As soon as I went into prison in 2013, one of the first things I needed to do was address my decision-making and choice-making issues, because, you know, as I said, you know, what led up to my crime in the first place was because, you know, I lost all sort of faculties of reasoning and trust, and I had big trust issues. So I did numerous courses. Whilst I was also in prison, I worked for another charity organisation called Keep Out, which was a crime prevention, a crime diversion scheme that brought young people through young offenders institutions, pupil referral units into schools, into prisons, and we, as 7 prisons at a time, would deliver a whole day workshop to try and basically show them that, look, you know, the slightest mistake, you could be the most law-abiding citizen, but all it takes is one wrong choice, one wrong move, which could basically, in essence, land you in prison. And if you'd sort of, I mean, if the paperwork had unfolded differently, you would have had your citizenship established when your parents did as well. Absolutely. I was entitled. But you didn't. So you're in a way, you're the victim of small print or bad luck as much as you're a victim of bureaucracy. You won your first appeal, so you come out of prison. We told more or less straight away that you were facing a deportation order? Correct. Because you are still a foreign national and you'd served 15 months. So you appeal that, presumably with a bit of confidence, given that you have lived here since you were 10. It was a white-collar crime, so the idea that you would pose a threat to society upon your release is hard to sustain, and even harder when they look at the charity work that you've done. So when you went to that first appeal, presume you thought you were going to walk it, did you, or not?
Well,
I mean, I know there's fear.
Sure, no, of course, there's always fear. There's always that anxious moments that, someone might just read, the surface of my index offence and not actually, go into the details of what perhaps led to that offence and the exceptional circumstances about my case, which makes it unique and therefore fits into the Home Office's own exceptional.
Yeah. Okay, so that's why you won the appeal, but they took you back to tribunal.
Correct. The upper tribunal.
And you lost.
And I lost that, correct. The Home Office appealed the decision from the first-tier tribunal, and I lost that upper tribunal. Basically on the basis that the judge felt that there was an error in the law, in the lower court's decision making. I appealed that. It went up to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal basically said that both judges had discretions and therefore exercised their discretions, and that was the end of that. And I put in a fresh application on the grounds that my family circumstances have changed.
Yes.
My wife.
Your wife's not very well. Social workers' reports have been compiled on your children.
Absolutely.
They've suggested to you that you would be able to exercise pastoral care for your children over Skype.
That's correct. So the Home Office's idea is that, sufficient fatherly figure can be provided using various means of social media such as Skype and WhatsApp, which, for me is very scary, because, when you look at where I come from, and I believe, I come from Brixton, young black boys, and I've got two of them, are more susceptible to, gang culture, antisocial behavior, poor in schools, and that's not always the case. I should say that. Of
course, no, but the narrative is well established, and you're also arguing that the system should take into account the stuff that you've done since leaving prison, or the stuff that you did in prison, because in the notion of citizenship,
correct,
there's no room at all for that in the current.
There isn't, and it's rather unfortunate that the Home Office has adopted a one-size-fits-all sort of approach. It's not forgiving at all. It's almost inhumane at times, in how it deals with cases, and there needs to be a certain measure of justice being tempered with mercy as well, because if you take into consideration the fact that I came in when I was young, lived here my whole life, that apart from the index offence being my only offence,
Yes, I do understand, and I know that. I've met your little boy. He's gorgeous, but I can't quite imagine. During Windrush, we spoke to people as the Windrush scandal emerged, who were sort of every time the doorbell rang, there'd be that frisson of fear. Does that describe you?
Jamie, that is so real. Yeah. That is literally real. I'm constantly on the edge. I've got high blood pressure, anxious. I'm on 3 sets of medication, to control my...
And so what happens next, Hilary?
So what happens next is, I'm currently on immigration bail.
Yes.
Which means...
So you have to report to the Home Office later today?
Correct. Okay. As a matter of fact, straight from the studio, I'm going down to report. And I could be picked up and put in a detention centre such as Brook House or Yarlswood or Hammersworth at any moment in time, and be away from my family, which wouldn't be the first time it's happened either. Back in April, I was put in such...
And what's the next... where are your hopes pinned currently, then?
My hopes are pinned on British public, first and foremost, taking an interest in really, we've always been a country of, give people as many opportunities as possible, in life till they get it right. I've made one mistake my whole life, and I'll plead that, I'm not punished, and neither is my family punished for eternity twice, because I've already been punished through the criminal justice system, and now a second time, potentially. And also, I am also asking that, people sign a petition which is going live today.
How do we get in touch? How do we find out about that?
So that will be going live shortly after this programme, a petition that basically will ask the Home Office to, like I said, temper justice with mercy,
yes.
As a matter of fact. And we're also appealing directly to, the Home Secretary himself, Mr. Javid, who, we are hoping will take, a positive look at this and look at the facts of this case. I am no threat to society.
Is there a website, Hilary? How do people find it, or do you want to just...
So it will be on change.org.
Okay, so you will find the petition there under your name.
Correct.
Hilary Iniomo Marcus.
Sure.
I wish you luck.
Thank you very much, Jay.
I'm happy to have given you a little bit of a loud hailer to tell your story, and we'll keep an eye on how it unfolds.
Fantastic.
And how it develops. But
it goes a long way to help. Thank you.
There's a little boy looking at me through the glass who needs his dad around the place. I think that can be chalked up as relatively uncontroversial. Hilary, thank you. It's 1 minute after 11. We'll take a few more of your calls because Hilary took up about a quarter of the last hour, so we'll take at least a quarter of this hour to canvass a few more calls. Astonishing how many people in Ireland have been in touch already. We'll speak to a couple more because it's a sense of bewilderment now, I think, that's setting in. There's a sort of rictus grin, perhaps, attached to that bewilderment. But it had to happen in this way. I don't see how it could have unfolded any differently. Once the Good Friday Agreement was read and understood, then Theresa May's so-called Mansion House speech about red lines, when triangulated with the European Union's constitutional requirement, I think, not to divide the four freedoms, then it was always going to lead to here, as far as I understand anything. And the only thing that ever made me think maybe it won't lead to this astonishing mess and logjam and circular firing squad of Brexiters now is my slightly, I don't know, is it a public school thing? I just thought that, you know, these chaps they must know. They can't be completely bonkers or wrong. I think I might have suffered from a bit of public schoolitis. It's sort of not quite doff-cap tug-forelock territory, obviously, because I think anyone who's listened to this programme even cursorily over the last few years will know I don't really do deference, particularly not to self-entitled silver spoon merchants. But I do perhaps suffer from a degree of thinking, you know, that Thatcher line about one of us. Is he one of us? Even though you might disagree politically violently with someone, you sort of come from vaguely similar backgrounds, so you presume there must be something behind it. Especially Gove, actually, and he's obviously being the quietest at the moment. The problem now is his reputation is so shredded, you don't know whether he's being quiet out of shame or out of ambition. I think both are equally plausible. Genuinely think both are equally plausible. A sense of shame, but that only really works if you publicly declare it. I'm really sorry, I had no idea. I thought I was writing a newspaper column, not the next 20 years of British history, when I led this campaign that broke the law. And so bewilderment, really, sitting here looking at Ireland, having described and predicted every single scintilla of proceedings now, still people are insisting that there is somehow an alternative path. And I genuinely don't get it, especially when colleagues tell me that some of these so-called big hitters of Brexit are privately expressing complete and utter confusion about what is happening, what has happened, and what will happen. So why in public? Is it just career reputation management? Is it just because if they did it in public, they'd be toast? But most of these people have come back from humiliations in the past. Liam Fox really should be rightfully described still as disgraced. You know, Boris Johnson, his personal, private and political lives are so riddled with shame that, you know, the idea that he's still relevant is a national joke. Who else have we got on that list? Ian Duncan Smith, a man who lied on his own CV and yet ended up as leader of the Conservative Party. These are not men who think that doing bad things have consequences. They're men who think that doing bad things and getting caught are sort of occupational hazards in the pursuit of power and status. Who else would you put on those? Rees-Mogg hasn't been involved in it. I mean, opening up 2 funds in Dublin while claiming that there's no downside to leaving is a little bit off, but it's not up there with claiming that you went to the University of Perugia on your CV when it turns out you went to a technical college around the corner that didn't even offer degrees. Actually, in Duncan Smith, by the way. Boris Johnson fired from the traineeship at the Times for making up quotes from his own godfather. Liam Fox taking his special friend on government trips. He even had his own little business cards printed. I teach my children to play by the rules. And then this happens. Sorry, David, in Cork, I've kept you. You've probably nodded off, David. That would be absolutely fine if you have.
Yeah, no, it's fine, James, it's fine. Good to speak to you. I've listened to the show for quite a while. Don't always agree with you, but yeah.
No, it'd be boring if you did.
Very good broadcaster and enjoy your stuff, so...
You're very kind. What's going on here?
I'm maybe coming out from a slightly different view here in Cork where the sun is absolutely shining. Like, I'm almost at the point now I'm kind of going, and this is... In my professional life, I deal with a number of businesses that export to the UK, and they are certainly starting to speak that their view would be that they would be hopeful that the government, the Irish government I'm referring to here, is pushing more and more, and perhaps they are behind the scenes for a free deal, a free trade deal, because these are guys that are exporting in the agricultural business.
They can't do that yet. I mean, we've got to get the withdrawal agreement out of the way first. That's the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of the end.
But the view would certainly be that Ireland has more to lose than any of the other member states.
Yes, that's very true.
While the Irish government so far has been playing the party line of going, look, one for all, and we're all in this as one team of 27, it's not really realistic to think that the impact on Ireland will be the same as the impact on, I don't know, say Poland or wherever else. And the view is starting to get...
But you need to remember, and I mean, there's no way that you can split the 27. Every single parliament will actually vote on the terms of our final arrangement. Every single one will have the power of veto on the final arrangement. That's how much control we're getting back. And I understand what you're saying, but don't forget that if you look at it through the lens of pro-Brexit people, they're claiming that losing membership of the largest trading bloc in the world can somehow be made up for by signing a new trade deal with Ulaanbaatar. So the logic that you employ belongs on the Remain side of the argument. On the Leave side of the argument, you have got people standing up in public claiming that it doesn't matter that we're going to leave the single union because, you know, countries like Andorra will be queuing up to sign trade deals with us.
Yeah, I think it's just, you know...
You're being logical, is what I'm saying. You're being logical, mate, and this is a Brexit debate.
But I think just from kind of listening to it, it does all seem to be, you know, Ireland are still playing the party line, but that is starting to...
Well, maybe that's Britain's best hope, is that they can somehow insert fractures into the European Union's negotiating practice. But I don't think the European Union's constitution would allow Ireland to pursue any independent
and it doesn't look that way, does it? I mean,
no.
It looks, and when you compare the two negotiating strategies, we've got Barney and his team completely silent, keeping everything in-house, and we've had a drip feeding of information across all the mailing platforms for the last 2 years as to what's going on and who's backstabbing who. It's been shambolic.
We have on this side of the sea, but I've known what Barnier's position was since pretty much July 2016. But I mean, David's right. If you were an Irish businessman or woman who has the bulk of your trade being done with mainland Britain, then this is worse for you than almost anybody else. The almost anybody else, of course, being us. Gareth is in Benidorm. That's rather nice. We're really hopping around the world today, from Cork to Benidorm. What would you like to say, Gareth?
Good morning.
Hello.
James, right, now, here's a funny thing.
Narrator, this won't be funny at all. Carry on.
Well, I do have a funny story, but this isn't the funny bit. This is the scary bit. There's a website in Benidorm. I'm out in the mountains, about 20 minutes drive away from Benidorm.
Lovely.
And I'm working out something at the moment with Jason Hunter, who may be coming here to do something with Three Blokes in the Pub.
Oh, excellent.
And so I'm doing a little bit of background stuff, and I've got contacts in Benidorm, although I don't actually live there. I live out in the country with 4 donkeys in a farm.
You keep stressing this. There's a degree of reverse snobbery going on here. All I'm hearing so far is, look, it says Benidorm on the telephone switchboard, James, but I'm not in Benidorm. I'm living a sylvan idyll up a mountain with 4 donkeys. Please don't get me mixed up with that other Benidorm that you see on the telly all the time.
Actually, there is. I could talk about Benidorm for some time because
it's a beautiful town, Benidorm.
I'm a geography teacher, and I've written the definitive case study for GCSE geography on tourism in Benidorm. But I won't go into history. There's a lot more to the place than you'd ever think.
Exactly.
But anyway, the scary thing first. On this website in Benidorm, which is benidormseriously.com.
Yes.
Which is a business website. It's basically the people that look at it are basically residents. They've got businesses, they've got bars, they've got various services, IT stuff, and all that. And on this website, which is basically for residents, it says Brexit will affect every single one of us. Britain's time in the EU is running out. Blah blah blah. If you were voting today, what would you choose? So this is right up, bang up to date.
Yeah.
And I looked at this and I thought, oh, that's interesting, and I just sort of put in, because it's in or out, and I voted in, and I looked at the figures.
Yes.
And 48%, and this is expats here in Spain.
I know, it's not, though.
48% are voting out. Now, not 2 years ago. And I just find that absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it's an online poll, so there is. Yeah. It's always weighted in favour of gammon, to be honest, the people who spend their whole lives online looking for things to get angry about, and they'll have clicked on it, and they may have been able to click on it hundreds and hundreds of times. But I'm now of the view that I would find it astonishing if you got 15% of people in Spain saying that they still think it's a good idea. So you know, that's the real mystery. Can you account for it? Can you? Okay. I mean, can you explain it briefly, if you would?
That's where the actual funny story comes in, and it is brief. I was talking to a chap in a pub, as you do.
Well, the best stories start like this.
Next
thing I know, I bought a horse.
About pensions and the way that it's going to affect us, closing down our bank accounts in the UK.
Potentially. These are the 750 treaties that we seem to be...
This.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I think it's all for the good because, you know, there's just too many of them, isn't there? And I said, what? And he said, well, it's all these immigrants coming into the country. I said, well, we're in Spain. Yeah. I said, how long have you been here? And he said, well, I've been here for 20 years, but I've still got family at home, and it's just too much. You've got all these people coming in. Yeah. And this is here in Spain. And so I said to him, well, you know, tell me about that. Why do you find that a problem? He said, well, they don't speak English, do they? They all stick pretty much to themselves and so on.
I think we know where this is going.
So you've been here 20 years. I speak fluent Spanish. And I said to him, how much Spanish do you speak? I said, well, you don't need to, do you? They all speak English in the shops. Yeah.
That is, I mean, it's almost beyond analysis, that, isn't it? It's unfortunately, I had... because when the racists were still on the front foot and they were banging on about language tests and we'll chuck out anyone who can't speak the language, I had my April the 1st planned, which I was going to come on air with a completely straight face and say they were going to do the same for British expats in Spain, and anyone who couldn't would have 3 months, and if they couldn't pass a written and oral examination in Spanish within 3 months, they'd be required to leave. But April Fool's Day fell on a flipping Sunday this year, so my best laid plans, Gareth, went aglaé.
Well, I will have to take the culture and language test when I get my Spanish citizenship, because I'm going to get a Spanish passport. I have to wait another 2 years. I've been here 8 years. In fact, I was actually in school in Spain when I was 11 to 15, back in the 60s. And so I've actually had quite a lot of years in Spain, but you've got to have
10 consecutive years.
Yeah,
does Spain allow dual citizenship, or will you be surrendering? So you'll be surrendering your British citizenship on this one?
Yes, and if Brexit happens, I mean, my daughter in Wales is going to the march next week, and I hope it doesn't happen next Saturday. But if it does happen, then I say goodbye to the UK. I become a Spanish citizen. I know and love the culture of Spain,
of course,
and the history, the literature, and I don't think I would have lost anything. I would have felt that the country that I knew doesn't exist anymore.
And I mean, I suppose those of us who are still here will have to make the best of a undesirable lot. And in some senses, I envy you your freedom. Although surrendering your British citizenship in order to secure your future doesn't necessarily have the smack of taking back control. Gareth, thank you very much indeed. 11:18. A couple more on this because it's just really interesting, and we're getting as much story as opinion, which, as you know, is something of a soft spot of mine. It's 11:18, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I think bewilderment is probably the fair word, even more than anger. My anger, as you will know, if you are kind enough to listen regularly, is reserved for the salesmen, not the customers. It's reserved for the liars, not the people who believed the lies. It's reserved for the holders of high office and status, some of the most glittering prizes that our society can visit upon people who've decided that it's still not enough. They still think that ordinary folk have got too much. They still think that workplace rights should be removed, that regulations should be diluted, that more and more money should make its way into the pockets of mysterious private investors as opposed to the people actually doing the work. And it's the bewilderment that one feels when you look at people being essentially sprinkled with liquid manure and being told that it's perfume, and they still believe it. And I'm not angry with them. Obviously, I'm going to stand upwind of them, but it's the people spraying the manure, and they're still at it. Rees-Mogg, still at it. David Davis, still at it. Boris Johnson, still at it. Nadine Dorries, presumably still at it, if she's remembered how to tie up her shoelaces. But the rest of them, it just makes no sense. The Irish thing. Katya Adler, the BBC's Europe editor, is reporting this morning that the British government requested that the Irish border issue not be discussed between December and the end of Tory party conference? Because, of course, the Conservative Party conference going well is the single most important issue facing the country at this time. That's the thing that amazes me. So I promise you, if you are still covered in liquid horse poo or cow poo, actually, a slightly more pungent aroma, and still desperately trying to kid yourself that it's actually Chanel No. 5, I promise that I won't get cross with you anymore. I promise. I promise to do my best. That's all anyone can ever promise to do, as my 10-year-old repeatedly reminds me. I promise, all right? And I promise that I will never stop calling out the people who have sprayed you with liquid manure. I never will stop, because if they get away with it this time, what are they going to spray us with next? But I'm not going to get cross with you anymore. Unless you are one of those people who kind of deep down knows what you're covered in and won't be happy until everybody else is covered in it too. That's a mindset I don't understand, and I reserve the right to get angry with people who derive pleasure. I mean, this is the you lost, get over it school of thought, where I say, I'm going to be fine, you're going to be really badly off. And you go, yeah, ha-ha. And I just go, huh? So, by all means, you sit there pretending that the smells wafting up your nostrils are pleasant, but don't think that I am going to forget who covered you in it in the first place. That's a crucial distinction. I haven't quite got there yet, properly, because how do you tell the difference? And social media is a very unhelpful lens through which to view these matters, because, of course, social media makes you think that we're essentially a country full of people who've defecated in their own hands and started clapping because we won. Woohoo! And I don't believe that we are. I do believe that the more evidence emerges, the more facts are established, the harder it will be to sustain the idea that it's all going horribly wrong because of the people who said it would all go horribly wrong, as opposed to because of the people who lied and said it was all going to be great. Nick's in Stafford. Nick, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. How are you, bud?
I'm all right, Nick. Thank you for your expression of concern.
What I want to say is I work for a large food distribution company, dealing out with chilled and ambient foodstuffs into supermarkets.
What's ambient? Room temperature, but fresh?
I work in the chilled department myself, so I deal with stuff like yogurts, milk.
When does it stop being funny? Day 3 or day 4 when you start making jokes about working in the chilled department?
Yeah, I know, it's horrendous. But what I wanted to say was the large portion of the employment base at our company is from Europe. They are mainly Romanians, Polish, stuff like that. And we've now had posters put up by our company saying that we don't know what's happening with Brexit, we don't know whether you're going to be able to stay here, and we don't know if we're going to be able to support you. And our local manager has basically said to us that the company will virtually fold because it will not be able to find English people to fill that employment.
So you could lose. I mean, everyone's livelihood is potentially under threat.
Absolutely.
Not just the foreigners, not just the foreigners.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm quite lucky there. I'm in a full-time contracted position, so I do have some kind of legal right there. But most of these guys are working through agencies, which means they have no rights whatsoever.
They've got more rights, and they've got more rights than they're going to have after Brexit.
Oh, absolutely.
They've got no rights whatsoever, and they're about to lose them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was a staunch Remainer from day one. I never believed any of this Brexit fiasco.
Did you not? Because did you not have that little voice that I had, where I just thought, and I'm horribly, horribly conscious of the fact that this might be because of going to private school and knowing people like this all my life. I just thought they must have something to base this on. They can't be as...
I would have hoped so, but no, I'm a comprehensive schoolboy. I am working class. I am this
And you saw through them while they were claiming to represent you.
I mean, I'm a rational human being. I looked at the facts and went, this isn't going to happen.
Oh, you're so 2015.
It's one of those horrendous things where you look at the facts and you go, why are people voting for this?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. What is the logic behind this?
Yes.
But no, even some of the English guys I work with, they work there and they see what it's causing, and they still are adamantly Brexit, and I just want to ram their heads into brick walls. It's insane.
So when you point the signs up on your own walls to them, and you say, look, if we lose all these lads, then it's curtains for all of us, and they still go good. So these are the people the mythical constituency of people who voted to lose their own jobs.
Yeah, it's like commercial suicide, and these people just don't see it, and it just drives me absolutely insane. And then I get labelled a liberal elite, and I'm a working class lad earning just above minimum wage, and I get classed as liberal elite because I can see the writing on the wall.
Do you read books?
Oh, I do. Yeah, I do read books.
Yeah, there you go, mate.
That's it. I read books. They read the Daily Mail. That's the difference.
Well, the Daily Mail's slowly changing, but it's going to be like an oil tanker turning around. And if you say to them, "What have you won?" Do you ever get? Because this is where I struggle.
Yeah, I ask them what do they think they're going to get out of this, and it's always the same three soundbites that you continually say. It's sovereignty. Yeah. It's taking back control of our borders, and it's basically to help the English working class, and it's not helping the British working class by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, even my direct manager above me, he seems to think that we can somehow find, I don't know, 150 English blokes that are willing to do these low-paid positions, that are willing to work all hours under God's earth for very little reward in the end.
Well, I suppose, arguably, if the economy is straightened sufficiently and terms and conditions and workplace regulations are compromised and diluted to the degree that someone like Andrea Leadsom has called for, she's called for small companies to have absolutely no workplace.
We're not that small of a company, so
no, I know you're not, but there might be people who are currently what you might call sort of 4 or 5 out of 10 on the job satisfaction scale, forced to move into jobs that will put them at 1 or 2, and they're voting for that decline in their own conditions.
It's because it's propaganda that they've been force-fed that we are Little England still, and we're not Little England still. We've moved on from the 1960s and 70s where Britain still had remnants of empire.
I have. I spoke to a 35-year-old on Friday who thinks back fondly to the 1990s as some sort of halcyon days of pre-EU freedoms and joys. Les Nelton's been in touch. He says, you never mention the role of the Bilderberg Group in all this, do you, James? Les, you're absolutely right. I never mention the role of the Bilderberg Group in all this because I'm not a chuntering wazzock, Les. It's really quite straightforward. And Simon's been in touch to say JOB's on good form. He just called everyone who doesn't agree with him a racist. No, I didn't, actually. But in your case, I think it probably is accurate.